My mom let me nearly starve for 3 days rather than drink poison sugar, then smirked when I told her I thought I was going to die and said, better dead than brainwashed. I stayed silent. That was 2 years ago. This morning, she was sitting in a courtroom staring at the table like she didn't recognize her own hands. What was the weirdest hill your parents picked to die on? My parents banned me from eating any sugar starting when I was 13 after watching some documentary about how sugar was basically poison. They threw out everything including the organic honey and started reading every single label at the grocery store with a magnifying glass. Our kitchen turned into this weird laboratory of sugar substitutes that tasted like chemicals and gave everyone stomach aches. When I asked why my friends could eat sugar without dropping dead, my parents would get this sad look and say everyone I loved was secretly riddled with disease from their sugar addiction. They were just so used to being sick that they didn't notice. They said anyone who ate sugar was walking around flirting with death. At first, I completely believed them and would picture my friends' insides rotting whenever they ate candy. I became the weird kid who brought celery sticks to movie theaters and had to decline every piece of gum. Birthday parties were the absolute worst because I had to sit there with my plastic container of raw almonds while everyone else ate cake and ice cream. By senior year, I didn't know what to believe anymore because everyone around me ate normal food and lived normal lives except for us. I was pretty sure that sugar wouldn't actually kill me, but I didn't know I was about to be forced to put my parents' theory to the test. The morning of our senior class camping trip, I woke up with the worst stomach flu of my life, probably from those experimental kelp noodles my mom made for dinner. I threw up twice in the bathroom, but knew if I told anyone I'd missed the trip I'd been looking forward to all year. So I grabbed my packed bag and pretended everything was fine when my parents dropped me off at school at 5 in the morning. I waved goodbye and walked toward the buses where everyone was loading up their stuff, but instead of getting on the bus, I ran to the bathroom and spent the next hour completely miserable on the floor of a stall. When I finally came out, the parking lot was completely empty, and the buses were gone. I figured I could just call my parents to pick me up, except my phone was in my backpack on the bus heading to the mountains because I'd thrown it in the storage compartment before running to the bathroom. The school was completely locked down. Every door had those magnetic locks that only opened with key cards, and all the windows had security bars. I was literally trapped inside the building with no way to contact anyone, and my parents thought I was safely on a camping trip. The only food in the entire school was the vending machines in the cafeteria, which were stocked with sodas and candy bars. I spent the entire first day just drinking from water fountains, but by Saturday morning I was shaking and dizzy and could barely walk. The water fountains barely worked, and only gave tiny trickles of warm water that tasted like metal. I stood in front of that vending machine for 20 minutes staring at the Sprite while my hands shook because part of me genuinely believed it might kill me, but I also knew that not drinking something definitely would kill me. I finally pressed the button and held that cold bottle for another 5 minutes before taking the smallest sip possible and waiting to see if my body would react. When nothing happened except feeling slightly less like death, I took another sip and then another until I'd finished the whole bottle. For 3 days, I lived on Sprite and Coke and Snickers bars, feeling like I was poisoning myself with every sip, but also feeling more energized than I had in years, which made me question everything my parents had ever told me about food. The janitor found me Monday morning passed out in the cafeteria surrounded by empty bottles and candy wrappers. The paramedics said I was severely dehydrated despite all the soda, and that my blood sugar was unstable from years of restriction, followed by 3 days of only sugar. They told off my parents for pushing their ridiculous beliefs on me. My mom kept crying and apologizing for making me so afraid of food that I'd almost waited too long to eat anything even when I was starving. After I got released from the hospital, my parents completely changed their attitude about food and bought normal groceries for the first time in years, including actual ice cream and regular bread. I was washing dishes after dinner, feeling relieved that the sugar insanity was over when my mom came into the kitchen with her laptop and this intense look on her face that I recognized immediately. Honey, we need to have a family meeting because while you were in the hospital, I did some research, and the real problem isn't sugar at all. It's the fluoride and chemicals in tap water. So starting tomorrow, we're only drinking rainwater that we collect ourselves. It turned out the horrors were only just beginning. The next morning, Mom dragged Dad and me outside at 6 a.m. to help her set up these huge blue barrels she'd ordered online for catching rainwater off the roof. Dad climbed up with a ladder carrying gutters and pipes while Mom shouted instructions from below about optimal angles for water flow. Isabella stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, watching us like we'd all lost our minds. Are we seriously doing this again? She asked, and Mom launched into this whole speech about how the government puts fluoride in tap water to control our minds and make us passive consumers. She had printed out like 50 pages from websites with names like truthwaterfreedom.com and kept waving them around while Dad hammered brackets into the roof. By the time we finished setting up the collection system with filters made from old t-shirts and coffee filters, the whole backyard looked like some kind of science experiment gone wrong. At school the next day, I pulled out my mason jar filled with murky rainwater during lunch, and Jake just stared at it before asking what fresh hell my parents had come up with now. I explained about the fluoride mind control theory while he watched me take tiny sips of water that tasted like dirt and roof shingles. Missy Rodriguez walked past our table and did this total double take when she saw my jar before shaking her head and continuing to the teacher's lounge. 3 days later, I was sitting in my room looking up water safety information on my laptop and finding study after study showing that properly treated tap water is completely safe to drink. Isabella came into my room with tears running down her face because kids at school had started calling our family the doomsday preppers after seeing the barrels in our yard. We both knew trying to talk to our parents about it would be completely pointless since they'd just say everyone else was brainwashed. The next week, Mom caught me refilling my rainwater jar from the school water fountain and completely lost it, accusing me of poisoning myself on purpose. She pulled out her phone and showed me all these articles from conspiracy websites about how fluoride calcifies your pineal gland and blocks spiritual awakening. Dad stood behind her nodding along while he installed this expensive reverse osmosis system that wasn't even connected to any actual pipes, just sitting there doing nothing. A week after that, we were eating dinner, which was just dehydrated vegetables reconstituted with rainwater, when Mom mentioned she'd been getting these terrible headaches lately. She said it was from toxin withdrawal after years of tap water consumption and that her body was finally healing itself. Isabella and I looked at each other across the table, both thinking the same thing about how mom looked thinner and more tired every day. 2 days later, Jake's mom called our house after Jake told her about my water situation, and mom told her we were choosing natural living before hanging up on her. Then she announced that we were pulling out of all school activities that might expose us to chemicals, including sports and science labs and field trips. 2 weeks after that, Isabella collapsed during PE class from dehydration, and the school nurse called mom, who insisted Isabella must have secretly drunk tap water and was detoxing from the poisons. The nurse told mom she would call CPS if Isabella didn't start getting proper hydration immediately, which made mom cry and say the government was trying to steal her children. That night, I started sneaking regular water bottles in my backpack and hiding them in Isabella's room behind her dresser. She literally cried with relief when she drank the first bottle, and we worked out this whole system where I'd buy water with my lunch money and she'd hide the empty bottles in the trash at school. 3 days later, Aunt Claire came to visit, and her face went completely white when she saw the rainwater barrels and how skinny mom had gotten. She tried talking to mom about seeing a doctor, but mom accused her of being brainwashed by big water and pharmaceutical companies working together. Claire left after an hour, but pulled me aside on the porch and slipped me her phone number, telling me to call if things got worse. The next Monday, Ms. Rodriguez kept me after English class to ask about my home situation, and I tried to dodge her questions, but she noticed how I was taking these tiny, careful sips from my mason jar. She offered me her water bottle, and I wanted it so badly I could feel my mouth getting dry, but I shook my head and said I was fine because I was scared of what would happen if mom found out. That week felt like walking on broken glass because I kept waiting for someone to tell mom about the water bottle thing, but somehow nobody did. Isabella started hiding water bottles in her room behind her dresser, and I'd hear the plastic crinkling at night when she thought everyone was asleep. A week later, mom was putting away laundry when she found 3 empty bottles stuffed behind Isabella's bed, and the screaming started immediately. I'm trying to understand how Simoni's thinking could change so fast from sugar being deadly to water being poison. The way she went from apologizing about the sugar thing to immediately starting the rainwater collection makes me wonder if there's a pattern here. She dragged Isabella downstairs by her arm and dumped out every single bottle while yelling about poison and betrayal and how we were trying to kill ourselves. Dad tried to grab her shoulders to calm her down, but she spun around and shoved him hard enough that he stumbled backwards into the counter. "You support me completely, or you leave this house right now," she said in this scary, quiet voice I'd never heard before. Dad just stood there opening and closing his mouth like a fish, while Isabella ran upstairs crying and mom threw the bottles in the trash so hard the can tipped over. The next morning, Dr. Wells called the house about my hospital records from the camping trip, and mom picked up the phone in the kitchen. "We've switched to a holistic practitioner who actually understands healing," she said, before hanging up and unplugging the phone from the wall. She announced at dinner that we were done with Western medicine forever, and threw out the thermometer and the bottle of aspirin and even the band-aids. 4 days later, the house turned into this weird, silent tomb where mom only spoke to give meal instructions, and dad started working until 10 every night just to avoid coming home. Isabella and I ate our dinners without talking, while rain pounded against the collection barrels outside, and mom sat at the table watching us chew every bite. Jake caught me after school and pulled me behind the gym to show me this news article on his phone about a family in Oregon who got brain parasites from contaminated rainwater. I wanted to print it out and shove it in mom's face, but knew she'd just say it was government propaganda trying to keep people sick. "You can stay at my house," Jake said, but I couldn't leave Isabella alone with mom getting worse every day. Mom's hair started coming out in these huge clumps that clogged the shower drain, and she'd stand in the bathroom mirror pulling out more strands like it was totally normal. She started wearing this paisley headscarf and spent 12 hours a day on sketchy websites researching healing protocols that involved drinking clay and sitting in ice baths. Dad suggested seeing a doctor about the hair loss, and she locked herself in their bedroom for 2 days, refusing to come out. 2 weeks later, we had Isabella's parent-teacher conference, and I went along because Dad was conveniently stuck at work again. The teacher was explaining Isabella's math grades when Isabella suddenly stood up and walked to the water fountain in the hallway and started drinking right in front of mom. Mom grabbed her by the hair and yanked her away from the fountain while 3 teachers watched with their mouths hanging open. She dragged Isabella out to the car while the principal followed us, asking if everything was okay at home. That evening, the principal called our house, and I heard mom telling him we didn't need interference from government employees who didn't understand natural health. I was putting away groceries when I found these round glass bottles in the back of the pantry with labels completely in Chinese characters and no English anywhere. Mom said they were purification minerals from a special supplier, but the website she ordered from looked like something from the dark web with no real company information. My aunt started texting me every single day, asking how we were doing, and mentioning she'd been documenting things and talking to someone but wouldn't say who when I asked. She told me to write down everything that happened with dates and times and keep the notes somewhere mom wouldn't find them. A week later, mom announced she wanted to dig a well in the backyard because the rainwater wasn't pure enough anymore, and dad actually stood up from his chair and said no. They screamed at each other for an hour while Isabella and I hid upstairs, and mom accused him of not caring if his family died from toxins. Dad slept on the couch that night and every night after, while mom stomped around the house slamming doors. Isabella developed this wet cough that sounded like she was drowning, and I'd hear her crying in her room at night, too scared to tell mom she felt sick. I bought cough drops at the gas station and snuck them to her, and we'd sit at breakfast pretending everything was fine while she tried not to cough in front of mom. 5 days later, mom announced at dinner that we were starting a family cleanse where we'd only drink distilled rainwater for 3 days to flush out all the toxins from years of tap water poisoning. She'd set up this whole system in the backyard with tarps and buckets to collect rain, and then she'd boil it on the stove for hours until the whole house smelled like wet dirt. The first day wasn't too bad, but by day 2, I was so dizzy I had to hold onto the walls to walk, and Isabella couldn't even get out of bed without throwing up. Dad went along with it at breakfast, but when I went outside to grab my backpack from his car, I saw him in the driver's seat eating a whole sleeve of crackers and chugging a bottle of Gatorade he'd hidden under the seat. He saw me watching and just shook his head and mouthed, "Don't tell mom," before shoving everything back under the seat. The next morning, there was loud knocking at our front door, and when I looked through the window, Ms. Rodriguez was standing there with another woman I didn't recognize. Mom went to the door but didn't open it and just talked through the crack asking what they wanted. Ms. Rodriguez said she was worried about me missing so much school, and the other woman introduced herself as the district wellness coordinator. Mom started yelling about harassment and her rights as a parent and how the school had no business coming to our home. They tried to explain they just wanted to help, but Mom threatened to call the police if they didn't leave immediately. Ms. Rodriguez slipped some papers through the mail slot before they left, and Mom grabbed them and threw them straight into the trash without even looking at them. 2 days later, I was at the grocery store buying more distilled water because Mom said the rainwater wasn't pure enough. When Jake's mom appeared next to me in the water aisle, she looked around to make sure nobody was watching, then handed me a plastic bag with sandwiches and granola bars and regular bottles of water inside. She whispered that Jake had told her everything and she was keeping an eye on things, and if I ever needed help to just show up at their house anytime. I hid the bag in the garage behind Dad's old golf clubs and would sneak out there at night to eat real food when everyone was asleep. A week later, I was doing homework when I heard this awful crash from the backyard and ran outside to find Mom collapsed next to the ladder she'd been using to clean the rain gutters. She was conscious but couldn't stand up and kept saying she was fine, even though her face was completely white and her hands were shaking so bad she couldn't hold her phone. Dad called 911 even though Mom kept weakly telling him not to, and when the paramedics arrived, they took one look at her and loaded her straight into the ambulance. At the hospital, the doctor said she was severely anemic and dehydrated, and her blood pressure was dangerously low, but Mom kept insisting she was fine and didn't need any treatment. She signed herself out against medical advice and made Dad drive her home even though the doctor was practically begging her to stay for at least one night of IV fluids. The next morning, Dr. Wells showed up at our house and stood on the porch knocking for 10 minutes straight. Mom wouldn't open the door, but he started shouting through it that he was mandated to report medical neglect and that refusing treatment when you have minor children was a serious issue. Mom screamed back that she'd sue him for harassment and defamation and that he had no right to threaten her family. He left but said loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to hear that CPS would be contacted if she didn't get proper medical care immediately. 3 days later, a white sedan pulled up and a woman in a business suit got out along with a sheriff's deputy in full uniform. Mom saw them through the window and immediately grabbed her phone to start recording while the woman knocked and identified herself as a CPS caseworker doing a welfare check. Mom opened the door just a crack with her phone pointed at them, ranting about government overreach and constitutional violations and how they had no warrant. The caseworker calmly explained they didn't need a warrant for a welfare check and that they needed to see Isabella and me to make sure we were safe. Mom had no choice but to let them in, and they immediately noticed how pale we both looked and started asking about Isabella's cough, which had gotten so bad she could barely talk without wheezing. The caseworker asked to speak to Isabella and me separately, so she took Isabella to her room first, while I waited in the living room with Mom filming everything and muttering about lawsuits. When it was my turn, the caseworker asked me direct questions about what we were eating and drinking and whether we felt safe at home. I gave vague answers because I didn't know what would happen if I told the truth, and I kept thinking about Isabella being taken away to foster care. The caseworker left her business card and said she'd be back to check on us again soon and that we should call if we needed anything. After they left, Mom went into full paranoia mode, covering all the windows with sheets and ordering security cameras online that she installed on every door. She said the government was watching us now and that we couldn't trust anyone, and when Dad tried to calm her down, she accused him of inviting surveillance by calling 911 for the ambulance. Over the next week, I started using my phone to document everything like Aunt Claire had suggested when I'd called her secretly from school. I took photos of the empty fridge and the rain barrels and videos of Mom adding weird powder supplements to our water and dumping out the bottled water Jake's mom had given me when she found it in the garage. How does the body know to make someone collapse like that when they don't have enough water and iron? The way the mom fell off the ladder but could still argue with doctors is really puzzling to me. Isabella's cough kept getting worse until she was wheezing so bad at night I could hear her through the wall gasping for air. I begged Mom to take her to the doctor, but she said doctors were part of the system trying to poison us, and instead she made Isabella drink this disgusting tonic she'd made from rainwater and crushed herbs she'd ordered online. Isabella took one sip and immediately threw up all over the kitchen floor, and Mom just said that meant the toxins were leaving her body and made her drink more until Isabella was crying and dry heaving into the sink. I helped Isabella to her room while Mom stood there saying this was all part of the healing process and that we'd thank her one day. The next morning, Mom pulled us out of school completely and said she'd be homeschooling us from now on to protect us from government brainwashing. She set up the living room with 2 old laptops and made us watch documentaries about water conspiracies and chemical mind control for 8 hours straight while she researched more theories in the kitchen. The videos were all grainy footage of people claiming the government was poisoning everyone through tap water and that only pure rainwater could save humanity. Isabella kept falling asleep and Mom would shake her awake saying she needed to learn the truth. Our house felt like we were preparing for some kind of war, with Mom taping aluminum foil over the windows to block radiation and disconnecting the doorbell so nobody could disturb our learning. 4 days later, I heard Jake's voice outside shouting my name and saw him through the kitchen window standing on our porch. Mom ran to the door and told him through the glass that I wasn't allowed visitors and he needed to leave immediately. Jake kept saying he was worried about me since I hadn't been at school, and Mom grabbed her phone and called 911 to report someone trespassing on our property. The same deputy who'd come for the CPS visit showed up, and I watched through the window as Jake tried explaining that something was wrong in our house. The deputy looked at our foil-covered windows and wrote something in his notebook before making Jake leave. That night, I couldn't sleep and went to get some of Mom's rainwater from the garage when I found Dad sitting in his car drinking from a plastic water bottle. He jumped when he saw me and quickly hid the bottle under his seat, but I'd already seen the Dasani label. He made me promise not to tell Mom and pulled out another bottle from a case hidden in his trunk and let me drink half of it. The regular water tasted amazing after weeks of nothing but warm rainwater that tasted like dirt and metal. Dad said he'd been buying bottles at work and keeping them in his car because he couldn't take it anymore, but was scared of what Mom would do if she found out. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Claire saying she'd filed a formal complaint with CPS and included all the photos she'd taken during her visit. She said she was sorry, but she had to do something before we got got seriously hurt. I deleted the message immediately but felt this weird mix of being scared about what would happen and relief that maybe someone could help us. A week later, Mom found a letter from the school district that had been delivered while she was in the garage filtering rainwater. The letter said Isabella and I had too many unexcused absences, and they were starting truancy proceedings. Mom went straight to her computer and printed out homeschool withdrawal forms and made us both sign them, even though I tried to explain I needed to graduate. She said diplomas were just pieces of paper from a corrupt system, and real education came from understanding the truth about the world. My stomach dropped, realizing I might not even finish high school after everything I'd worked for. The next day, an APS worker showed up saying Dr. Wells had contacted them about Mom missing her follow-up appointments, and they needed to evaluate her mental state. Mom stood in the doorway screaming about her rights and threatening to sue everyone, while the worker kept calmly asking to come inside. The worker could see the aluminum foil on the windows behind Mom and kept looking at Isabella and me standing in the hallway. Mom finally slammed the door in her face and called Dad at work, telling him to come home immediately to deal with the government harassment. Isabella and I started leaving notes for each other hidden in books and under couch cushions, since Mom had started checking our phones every night. Isabella's notes got more desperate, saying she felt sick all the time and was scared she was going to die from whatever was in the rainwater. I wrote back telling her to hang on, and that help was coming even though I wasn't sure if that was true. 5 days later, Mom was doing her nightly inspection of the house when she found Dad's car keys on the counter and decided to move his car out of the garage to make room for more rain barrels. She opened his trunk and found 3 cases of bottled water hidden under a blanket. The scream she let out made the windows shake, and she started throwing the bottles at Dad as he came running from the bedroom. She kept screaming that he was a traitor who'd chosen poison over his family and that he was killing himself with every sip. Dad tried to calm her down, but she grabbed a kitchen knife and held it between them, saying he needed to leave right now. He packed a bag while Mom followed him around, still holding the knife and yelling about betrayal and poison. After he drove away, Mom told us Dad had made his choice and we weren't allowed to talk to him anymore because he was contaminated. Without Dad there to occasionally sneak us real food or calm Mom down when she got too intense, everything got worse immediately. Mom decided we needed to drink a full gallon of rainwater every day to flush out any toxins Dad might have exposed us to. She'd stand over us with a timer, making sure we drank a huge glass every hour, even when our stomachs were so full of water we could barely move. Isabella threw up the water constantly, and Mom would just make her drink more, saying her body was rejecting the toxins, not the water. I watched Isabella getting weaker every day, with her face this awful gray color and her hands shaking whenever she tried to hold the glass. Mrs. Rodriguez had been calling the house trying to check on us, but Mom stopped answering the phone completely. I found out later that Ms. Rodriguez had contacted the school district's legal department about our withdrawal, and they'd told her that without proper homeschool documentation, Mom and Dad could face criminal truancy charges. The next week, everything fell apart when I found Isabella collapsed on the bathroom floor, gasping for air like she was drowning on dry land. Her lips were turning blue, and she kept clutching at her chest, trying to pull in oxygen that wouldn't come. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911 while Mom screamed at me to hang up because hospitals were death traps run by the pharmaceutical industry. The paramedics pushed past her when they arrived and immediately put an oxygen mask on Isabella while checking her vitals. They said her oxygen levels were dangerously low and loaded her onto a stretcher while Mom tried to physically block them from taking her. One of the paramedics told Mom that Isabella was a minor in medical distress and they didn't need parental permission to transport her. At the hospital, the doctors ran tests and came back looking horrified at the results, showing severe pneumonia combined with malnutrition from months of barely eating. Mom tried to sign Isabella out against medical advice, but the charge nurse called security when Mom started pulling at the IV lines. 2 security guards had to physically restrain Mom from disconnecting Isabella's oxygen while she screamed about toxins and mind control drugs. The hospital social worker pulled me into a small office while security dealt with Mom and asked me to explain what had been happening at home. I showed her all the photos and videos I'd been collecting on my phone of the rain barrels and the cabinet full of weird supplements and Isabella getting sicker every day. She took notes while I told her about the isolation and the water restrictions and how Isabella hadn't been to school in weeks. Dad showed up 2 days later looking exhausted from whatever hotel he'd been hiding in, and Mom immediately started screaming at him in the hospital hallway about betrayal and weakness. Security had to escort her out while Dad stood there crying and apologizing to Isabella through the glass door of her room. He kept saying he should have stopped it sooner, and he was so sorry for letting it get this bad. The next morning, a judge issued an emergency custody order giving Dad temporary sole custody while Isabella was hospitalized. A court officer served Mom the papers right there in the hospital lobby, and she left screaming about government conspiracies and promising to fight back with every resource she had. Isabella slowly started getting better once the antibiotics kicked in, and they got her eating regular meals again. She actually cried when the nurse brought her a normal sandwich with regular bread, and she could just eat it without asking permission. I stayed with her every day because we were both terrified that Mom would somehow find a way to take us back home. 3 days later, Aunt Claire flew in from Seattle with suitcases full of clothes and toiletries since we couldn't go back to the house to get our stuff. She'd been working with a family lawyer for weeks after I'd been secretly texting her about what was happening, and she showed Dad a folder full of documentation she'd gathered. Mom showed up at the hospital with some guy in a cheap suit who claimed to be her natural healing advisor, and they tried to serve the hospital with cease and desist papers they'd printed off the internet. Security escorted them both out, and the hospital administration officially banned Mom from the premises after she tried to force her way past the nurse's station. The timing of everything breaking down is making me wonder, did Isabella's body finally reach some kind of limit with the rainwater? It's strange how bodies seem to have this breaking point where they just can't take anymore, like there's some invisible line that gets crossed and suddenly everything crashes at once. Dad rented us a small furnished apartment near the hospital where we could stay while everything got sorted out legally. It felt so weird being able to turn on the tap and drink water or open the fridge and eat whatever we wanted without checking ingredients or asking permission. Isabella and I kept looking at each other before doing anything normal, like we were waiting for someone to stop us. A week later, CPS formally opened an investigation based on the hospital reports and my documentation, and a case caseworker came to interview us at the apartment. She spent 3 hours asking questions and taking notes, and told us that what mom had done qualified as both medical neglect and educational neglect under state law. 2 weeks passed before the caseworker showed up at the apartment again with official paperwork saying Isabella and I would stay with Dad while the investigation continued. The district got involved when they found out I'd missed 3 months of school, and Ms. Rodriguez called me directly to set up a meeting about getting me back on track. I walked into her office that Monday morning, and she had already arranged everything with tutors who would help me catch up on all the work I'd missed. Jake practically tackled me in the hallway when he saw me and said he'd been scared I'd disappeared completely after everything that happened. While I was trying to catch up on calculus and English papers, Mom started sending Dad these long emails filled with legal terms she'd copied from websites about how the hospital had violated her constitutional rights. She filed a lawsuit against the hospital, CPS, and Dad claiming they'd kidnapped us and forced medical procedures without consent. She printed out stacks of papers from sovereign citizen websites and decided to represent herself in court. The judge took one look at her filing and dismissed most of her claims immediately, but let the custody case move forward. 2 weeks later, we had our first supervised visitation at the CPS office where a social worker sat in the corner taking notes while Mom talked to us. Isabella kept looking at the clock, and I could tell she just wanted to leave, but Mom kept trying to act like everything was normal. She pulled out a metal water bottle and tried to give Isabella a drink, but the supervisor immediately stood up and took it away. The supervisor tested it with some kind of strip, and her face went pale before she ended the visit right there. Mom started screaming about her rights, but security escorted her out, and the supervisor told Dad that Mom's visitation rights were suspended pending psychological evaluation. Isabella started seeing a therapist twice a week to deal with all the food issues Mom had created over the years. The therapist said Isabella showed signs of an eating disorder from years of being taught that normal food was poison. I found a support group that met at the community center for people whose parents had medical child abuse issues. There were 8 other people there, and hearing their stories made me realize we weren't alone in dealing with this kind of thing. The court sent Mom an order to undergo psychological evaluation, but she sent back a 20-page letter claiming the court had no jurisdiction over her as a sovereign citizen. The judge warned her at the next hearing that refusing to comply would affect the custody proceedings, but Mom just kept talking about maritime law and corporate personhood. 3 weeks later, Dad started his own therapy after the court suggested it might help our case. He told me after his first session that the therapist made him realize he'd been so afraid of losing Mom that he'd convinced himself her extreme behavior came from loving us too much. He promised he would protect us now and actually follow through this time. We were at school the next Tuesday when Dad got a call from our building manager saying someone had broken into our apartment. Dad rushed home and found Mom in the kitchen dumping all our food into garbage bags, while bottles of her collected rainwater sat on the counter next to jars of supplements. He called the police immediately, and they arrested her for breaking and entering, plus violating the restraining order we'd gotten after the water bottle incident. At her hearing, Mom decided to represent herself again and spent 40 minutes ranting about fluoride mind control and government conspiracies to poison the population. The judge kept trying to get her to focus on the actual charges, but Mom just kept pulling out printed articles about water treatment facilities and secret population control programs. The judge finally ordered a mandatory 72-hour psychological hold for evaluation, and 2 officers led Mom out while she screamed about her constitutional rights. The apartment felt weird without Mom's constant energy, and Isabella and I kept waiting for her to burst through the door with some new health crisis. A week later, we ordered pizza for the first time in years, and both sat there staring at it for 10 minutes before taking a bite. We both felt guilty enjoying it, but also couldn't believe how good actual food tasted after years of Mom's restrictions. The psychiatric facility sent their evaluation results showing Mom had untreated delusional disorder and severe anxiety that fed into each other in dangerous ways. The doctors recommended intensive inpatient treatment, but Mom refused all medication and kept insisting she was being persecuted for knowing the truth about government poisoning programs. Ms. Rodriguez called me into her office the next week with a stack of papers showing all my missing assignments from the past few months. She'd worked out a plan with the district to let me complete online courses while doing summer school for the core classes I'd failed. Jake started coming over every afternoon with his backpack full of regular snacks like granola bars and pretzels that he'd set on the table without saying anything. I'd stare at them for 10 minutes before taking tiny bites, waiting for my body to reject normal food that didn't come from Mom's approved list. Isabella would do her homework across from me, both of us slowly learning that eating regular food wouldn't kill us, even though our hands still shook sometimes when we opened packages. 2 weeks later, I was working through an online chemistry module when Dad got a call that made his face go white. Mom had escaped from the psychiatric facility during a fire drill by walking out with a group of visitors, and nobody noticed for 3 hours. The facility called Isabella's school immediately, and they went into lockdown mode with teachers locking doors and pulling blinds while security guards swept the building. Police found Mom's car in the school parking lot with the engine running and the back seat packed with camping gear, water filters, and boxes of emergency supplies. She was hiding behind the dumpsters near the gym entrance with a printed map of the school's emergency exits and Isabella's class schedule in her pocket. The police arrested her right there while she screamed about saving Isabella from government brainwashing and how we'd all thank her when the truth came out. They charged her with attempted kidnapping and violating the court orders that said she couldn't contact us or come within 500 feet of our schools. Her sovereign citizen friends started posting videos online saying we were victims of a government conspiracy to destroy families who knew too much. Our phones wouldn't stop buzzing with messages calling us traitors and threatening to expose our role in Mom's persecution. Aunt Claire drove up from Denver that night and helped us pack everything we owned into boxes while a security company installed new locks on our apartment. She found us a different place across town with a doorman and security cameras in every hallway and a panic button system connected directly to the police. For the next month, she stayed with us, teaching us things Mom never let us learn, like how to cook pasta that wasn't made from vegetables. She showed us how to balance a checkbook and pay bills online and shop for groceries without reading every ingredient with a magnifying glass. Isabella learned to make sandwiches with actual bread, and I figured out how to use the washing machine clean with regular detergent, instead of mom's homemade soap. 3 weeks after that, the district attorney called Dad to say they were adding child endangerment charges based on our medical records and Isabella's hospitalization. They had 5 years of documentation showing how mom's restrictions had affected our growth and development and caused nutritional deficiencies. The prosecutor said mom would likely face 6 months to a year in jail if convicted, and the trial was set for 6 months out. The judge denied bail after the escape attempt, calling her a flight risk and danger to her children's safety. Isabella went back to school with an IEP that let her leave class if she felt sick and keep snacks in her locker for blood sugar issues. She joined the art club and made friends with kids who didn't know anything about our family's history or mom's beliefs. Watching her laugh with other kids at lunch made my chest hurt when I realized she'd never had normal friendships before. The day of mom's preliminary hearing, protesters showed up at the courthouse with signs saying we were brainwashed and mom was a political prisoner. News vans lined the street and reporters shoved microphones at us asking if we'd been coerced by the government. Security guards had to escort us through a back entrance while people screamed that we were destroying our mother for money. A month after that, Dad finally filed for divorce and full custody, something Aunt Claire had been pushing him to do for weeks. Mom sent long, rambling letters from jail written in tiny handwriting about how we'd betrayed her and poisoned ourselves with chemicals. Her court-appointed lawyer visited Dad to suggest she might take a plea deal if we agreed to supervised visitation, but Dad said no. The community college acceptance letter came in the mail the same week, and Isabella helped me pick out notebooks and pens at Target. What made Mom think she could walk out during a fire drill without anyone noticing for 3 whole hours? Her brain must work so differently to plan hiding behind dumpsters with Isabella's schedule while thinking that would somehow help her daughter. We spent an hour in the school supplies aisle, both of us amazed that we could just buy things without checking ingredients or asking permission. She grabbed a package of regular highlighters and held them up with this huge smile, and we both started laughing at how normal it felt. Dr. Wells testified at the next hearing, bringing boxes of our medical records going back 5 years showing vitamin deficiencies and delayed growth. He explained how Mom's restrictions had caused actual harm, while she insisted everything she did was to protect us from toxins. Mom started shouting that he was part of the conspiracy until the bailiff removed her from the courtroom while she screamed about poison and lies. 2 weeks later, Dad got a call from the prosecutor's office asking us to come in right away because they'd found something during their investigation. We drove downtown in silence, and the prosecutor showed us printouts from Mom's jail phone account where she'd been calling some group called Citizens Against Water Poisoning every single day. The group had a website full of crazy theories about government mind control through tap water, and Mom had become their newest hero after her arrest made the news. She'd given them our home address and told them we were victims who needed saving from the government agents who'd stolen us from her. The prosecutor showed us screenshots from their private forum where members were planning to protest outside our house, and one guy from Texas had posted about driving up to Colorado to help Mom expose the truth. The FBI had gotten involved because several members had made threats against the judge and the CPS workers on the case. Dad's hands shook as he read through the posts where strangers called him a traitor and said he deserved whatever happened to him for betraying his wife. The prosecutor said they were increasing security at the courthouse and suggested we might want to stay somewhere else for a while. We packed bags that night and went to stay with Aunt Claire, who lived an hour away in Fort Collins. Mom kept calling the jail commissary to order bottled water, but they only had tap water in plastic bottles, so she stopped drinking anything at all. The guards found her passed out in her cell after 3 days and put her on medical watch where they had to give her IV fluids. Her lawyer came to Aunt Claire's house saying Mom couldn't help with her own defense because she kept insisting he was a government spy sent to poison her. She'd fired him twice and tried to represent herself, but the judge wouldn't allow it because she kept talking about water conspiracies instead of addressing the actual charges. Isabella threw herself into her science fair project about water purification and spent every night after school in the chemistry lab testing different water samples. She made this huge display showing how tap water was actually safer than most bottled water and included statistics about how many lives clean water systems had saved. The night before the fair, she told me she was doing it to prove to herself that everything Mom taught us was wrong. She won first place, and when they called her name, she walked up to get her trophy and said into the microphone that she dedicated it to everyone who's been taught to fear what keeps us alive. The whole auditorium went quiet because everyone knew our story by then. Mom's lawyer filed a motion for a competency evaluation because she'd accused him of putting poison in the pens at his office and refused to sign any documents. The judge ordered a full psychiatric evaluation to determine if she could stand trial, and they moved her from jail to the state hospital for assessment. A month later, I graduated in a small summer ceremony because I'd missed too much school for the regular graduation. Dad and Isabella sat in the front row crying as I walked across the stage to get my diploma. Ms. Rodriguez hugged me afterward and whispered that she was proud I'd survived everything and still managed to graduate. We drove to the state hospital the next week to visit Mom in the psychiatric ward, but when they brought her into the visiting room, she stared at us like we were strangers. After a minute, she started screaming that we were actors hired by the government to trick her, and the orderlies had to take her back to her room. The doctor explained that her delusions had completely taken over, and she couldn't distinguish reality from her paranoid fantasies anymore. He said she believed everyone was part of a massive conspiracy to poison her, and she'd stopped recognizing people she'd known for years. The competency hearing happened 2 weeks later, and took less than an hour because 3 different psychiatrists testified that Mom couldn't understand the charges against her or assist in her own defense. The judge ruled she was incompetent to stand trial and committed her to the state psychiatric facility for treatment, with the criminal charges suspended until she recovered enough to understand what was happening. 3 weeks after that, Dad sat us down and said he was legally changing our last names to his mother's maiden name because people kept finding us online and sending death threats. We deleted all our social media accounts, and Isabella had to change schools because kids kept asking her about Mom's arrest. The new name felt weird at first, but also like we could finally breathe without everyone knowing our story. Isabella and I started going to family therapy twice a week to deal with everything that had happened. The therapist made us talk about how we felt about Mom, and I realized I missed who she used to be before the documentaries and the paranoia took over. Isabella said she loved Mom but couldn't forgive her for making us scared of normal food and water for so many years. We both cried a lot in those sessions, but it helped to say things out loud that we'd been holding inside. One afternoon, Dad got a call from Mom's doctor about a new experimental treatment for delusional disorders that was showing good results in clinical trials. Dad signed the consent forms that day, even though the treatment would take months and might not work at all because he said he had to try to get back the woman he married 20 years ago. Isabella and I weren't sure Mom would ever be the same, but we understood why Dad needed to believe she could get better. A month later, I was carrying groceries into our new apartment when I found a manila envelope shoved under the door with my name written in block letters across the front. Inside were printed photos of me walking to school and Isabella at her bus stop with red X's drawn over our faces, plus a typed note saying we were poisoning ourselves with government water and would pay for betraying the truth. Dad called the police immediately, and they said it matched other threats from Mom's old water purity group, who blamed us for her arrest. The detective assigned to our case started having patrol cars drive by our apartment every few hours, but said we should consider staying with relatives until things calmed down. Dad spent that whole night on the phone with Aunt Claire in Denver, talking about schools there and job transfers, while Isabella and I packed emergency bags just in case. 2 weeks later, Dad drove us all to visit Mom at the treatment facility for the first time since she'd started the new medication. She looked smaller somehow, sitting in the visiting room wearing regular clothes instead of the weird homemade hemp stuff she'd been making. When Dad walked in, her whole face changed, and she reached out for his hand, crying and asking where her babies were, even though Isabella and I were standing right there. The moment lasted maybe 30 seconds before her eyes went blank again, and she started talking about fluoride, but Dad held on to that half minute like proof she was still in there somewhere. The next morning, I moved into my dorm at CU Boulder with a mini fridge full of regular food and a meal plan that let me eat whatever I wanted from the cafeteria. My roommate thought I was weird for taking photos of myself drinking from the water fountain, but after 5 years of only bottled rainwater, it felt like the biggest rebellion ever. I declared my major as public health on the first day and signed up for every class about nutrition science and health misinformation I could find. Isabella started her junior year of high school by joining the environmental club, where she gave presentations about actual water safety based on EPA data instead of conspiracy websites. She organized a fundraiser for water filters in low-income neighborhoods, using real science to explain why clean water mattered without scaring people into thinking the government was trying to kill them. 2 months after the treatment started, Mom's doctor called to say she was stable enough for supervised phone calls if we wanted to try. Her voice sounded thick and slow from the medication when she asked how we were doing and if we were eating enough vegetables, which was the most normal parent thing she'd said in years. She didn't mention water purity or government conspiracies even once during the 10-minute call, though she kept forgetting what she'd just said and asking the same questions over and over. 3 days later, the FBI arrested 12 members of Mom's old group for planning to dump industrial chemicals into the Boulder Reservoir to prove the water was already poisoned. Mom's name came up in their planning documents even though she'd been locked up for months, which meant she got transferred to a more secure wing with less privileges. The support group Dad had been going to for families of people with delusional disorders became his main social life, and eventually he started getting coffee after meetings with a woman named Patricia, whose ex-husband thought the government was controlling him through his dental fillings. Isabella and I met her a month later at a Thai restaurant where she talked about her job as a teacher and her 2 kids in college without once mentioning conspiracy theories or forbidden foods. 12 people planning to dump chemicals into the water supply to prove it's already poisoned? My brain is trying to figure out the logic there. Wouldn't adding poison to water just make it actually poisonous instead of proving anything? Dad smiled more during that dinner than he had in the past year, and even though it felt weird seeing him with someone who wasn't Mom, we were glad he'd found someone who understood what we'd been through. Mom's next letter came through her doctor 2 weeks before finals with shaky handwriting that said the medication was helping her think clearly, but that clarity was terrifying because she could finally see what she'd put us through. She wrote about remembering making us drink creek water and forcing us to eat expired food, and how she couldn't understand why she'd thought that was helping us when it was obviously hurting us. She didn't ask us to forgive her or write back, but just wanted us to know she was starting to understand, even if she couldn't undo any of it. I spent 3 days writing different versions of a response before finally sending one that just said I got her letter, and that Isabella and I were doing okay in school, and that Dad was taking care of us. I didn't mention the therapy appointments twice a week, or the panic attacks I still got near vending machines, or how Isabella had started hiding food in her room again just in case. The family court hearing happened over video with Mom calling in from the facility, looking tired but present while the judge went through all the custody arrangements. She agreed to everything including supervised visitation, only if she stayed on her medication, and completed the full treatment program, which would take at least another year. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she looked directly at the camera and mouthed, "I'm sorry," before the connection cut out and the hearing was over. Alright, that's gonna do it for today. I've really enjoyed just wondering and exploring with you. It's been such a cool conversation. Subscribe for more content like this.